Hi everyone, Mike here from Bikes by Mike with another cycling related video. Today I'm back in the garage to work on this, which is a 2020 Cannondale Hollowgram Knot 64 wheel. And this wheel went out of true after my accident a few months ago, so I'm going to try to true it back up today, and hopefully I can do it quite easily. It doesn't look as if any of the spokes were broken, so I should be able to get it back into true, because right now, as you can hear, it's not true. So the process I'm going to go through today is to make sure that the wheel is horizontally or laterally true, vertically true, also known as radial trueness, and also to make sure that the dish is centered, which is essentially to make sure that the center part of your hub is centered over the center part of your rim, so it's not lopsided or off center when you mount it onto your bike. But I'm also going to go through and make sure that the spokes are tensioned correctly, and to make sure that the deviation in tension between spokes is kept to a minimum, which for me is somewhere under 10% variation in deviation between spokes. Now, I actually retrued this wheel before my Haute Route trip back in June of this year. So on this spreadsheet on my Spoke Tension Variance Calculator here, I actually have the tensions of the spokes back in June. So obviously these are now all changed since the wheel is out of true. So I'm going to go through and create a new spoke tension calculator for this wheel and use it to make sure that when I'm all done and the wheel is true, that the spokes are tensioned correctly. And for this wheel, I basically want to land on spoke tensions that are somewhere between 120 and 130 kilograms of force. So if you're going to follow my process to make sure that the wheel is visually true, but also make sure that the spokes are tensioned correctly, and to be able to accurately measure the tension, then I'd also suggest that you look at my previous video on spoke tension calibration tools, which will be helpful to this. If you're not as concerned about measuring your spoke tensions with something like this, with a spoke tension meter, and you just really want to go by the look of the wheel and just visually make sure that you get it back to relative trueness, then you can still follow this process as well. Obviously, you're not going to use the Spoke Tension Variance Calculator spreadsheet like I'm using, and you might not even use a spoke tension meter. You might just go by feel. But the process in terms of how you tighten or loosen spokes to get the wheel back in true is going to apply whether or not you're doing it more visually or using more of a specific calibration method to get the wheel back into true. Before I get into actually truing up the wheel, I'll just go through the tools that I'm using, and I'll provide links in the description below to what the specific model numbers of the tools are and where you can get them. But basically I have my truing stand here, which is a great buy from AliExpress, and I've been using this for the last year or so. So you can get away with not using a truing stand, but it's going to make your life a lot easier if you use a proper bike truing stand. So for me, this is kind of a critical tool to be able to true a wheel or to build wheels. Also have a spoke tension meter. This is a digital one. Just turn it on. So it's a digital one, but there's also analog varieties as well. I also have this, which is a dish tool, relatively inexpensive one from Park Tools. Also have a blade holder. And this wheel comes with bladed spokes, so in order to be able to tighten the spokes, you need to be able to hold the blades at the proper angle. Otherwise, when you go to tighten the spokes, you actually wind up the spokes. And this is a good and easy way to hold the spokes while you're tightening or loosening them. Also have a spoke wrench, like this one here from Park Tools. They come in a lot of varieties, but in my case, for this rim, the only way you can access the spokes to tighten or loosen them is through the rim. So a lot of times you can use a spoke wrench that attaches to this part of the spoke, but in this case, need to use one of these to get access in there to the spokes. So that's critical to be able to work on a wheel like this. And there's a lot of different varieties out there, but this one is from Park Tools. Also, a bit of masking tape or painter's tape is useful. And what I'll do is, I'm just looking for the valve hole. There it is, right here. So you don't have to do this, but it does make it quicker and easier to identify where you are on the wheel. So I like to put a bit of tape over the valve hole so then I can quickly locate where I am on the wheel. Saves me a bit of time. So on a wheel, you obviously have two sets of spokes. You have those spokes on the drive side, and for the rear wheel, that's where the cassette is. And then you also have another set of spokes on this side, on the non-drive side and the disc side. So in order to true the wheel laterally, so horizontally, we'll focus on that first. Essentially the wheels on this side, the drive side, pulls the rim towards the drive side if you tighten them, and the reverse for the non-drive side. If we look at an example here, so you can hear it actually, that right here, the rim is out towards this side, towards the non-drive side. So it's touching the guide right here. So what I'd want to do is, depending on how large that area is, and in this case it's a fairly large area, it starts at this spoke, probably impacts all of these spokes on this side. So I'll take a few spokes and I basically want to pull the rim this way, which means I want to tighten the spokes on the drive side, on the cassette side. So to do that, I'd start with this first spoke, put my blade holder there, and basically start with small increments, maybe a quarter of a turn, and tighten the spoke. And you'll notice that whenever I tighten a spoke, you always want to tighten it, say a quarter, half turn, whatever you're doing, go beyond the point where you want to stop, and then back off a bit. So I'm tightening it, going beyond where I want to go, and then I back off and end up where I want to be. And the reason you do that is that you want to prevent the spokes from winding up. And when you tighten the spokes, even if you're holding them with a tool like this, the blade tool, they can still wind up a bit. So you want to kind of release that wind up, release that tension by kind of backing off as you finish tightening the spoke. So that's what I'll do is I'll pick different spots on the wheel, look at where it's touching the guide, look at the spokes in that area that I want to tighten to bring that rim back into lateral alignment. What you don't want to do is only work on one side of the wheel. So obviously theoretically, you could true a wheel only by working on one side of the wheel by tightening or loosening the spokes that are impacted. The problem is if you do that, your wheel is going to end up shifting, so the dish is going to be off. It's no longer going to be centered. The rim is no longer going to be centered on the center part of the hub. So you want to kind of work on both sides, doing a few spokes, doing a few areas on one side, and then switching to the other side, which is what I'll do. So the first thing I'm going to do before I do any truing the wheel is I'm going to go through and record the spoke tensions on all the spokes. And really for me, I like doing that because then I can see where I'm at, where the spokes are over tensioned potentially or under tensioned. And that's helpful in deciding which spokes to work on and use to fix the deviation or fix the parts of the rim that are out of true. Obviously, if a spoke is over tensioned, then you really don't want to add additional tension to that spoke to true the wheel. You'd rather pick a nearby spoke to tighten to improve the trueness, or sometimes the best option is just to loosen spokes in the area to get it back into true. But you can't really do that unless you have some idea as to what the tension is of your spokes. So that's what I'm going to do now, set my baseline spoke tensions, and then I can go from there. So I've now gone through and taken my first readings of the spoke tension on both sides of the wheel, both sides of the rim. And here you can see that, and I'm quite surprised that the spoke tensions are not horrible. So here I have my spreadsheet set for 10% variation, spoke deviation variation. And there's two spokes that fail. There's on the dry side, there's this first spoke that is over tensioned. It should be no more than 130 kilograms of force. It's at 135. And then on the disc side, spoke 3 is under tension by quite a bit actually. So those are the two that are problematic. So since they're out of whack, I'm going to look at where on the wheel the trueness is off. And I'm going to try to adjust the spoke tensions in this area to try to get the trueness fixed, as well as to get the spokes more within acceptable variation and tension. So I have the wheel here, and I'm working on the drive side here. Here's my first spoke on the drive side. And again, if I look at my spreadsheet, that spoke is over tensioned. I'm just going to double check the reading. Yeah, it's 2.6, so yeah, it's 135 kilograms of force. So I'm going to start by removing some tension and loosening this spoke by half a turn. So you saw there that I loosened the spoke too much, so the tension dropped way too much. So I went from half a turn of loosening to a quarter turn. And that quarter turn has me to where I kind of want to be for that spoke, which is 122.5 kilograms of force. And the rim is still touching here, so I'm still going to have to work on the other ones. So now I'm going to flip the wheel around and take a look at this spoke number 3 on the disc side or non-drive side. So this is my spoke number 3 on the disc side or non-drive side. And this is the one spoke that is not within tolerance. It's way below this tension it should be at. So it's at 105 kilograms of force, and it should be no less than 120. Actually, this is on the disc side, so the disc side tends to be lower spoke tensions than the drive side, which need to be within the no more than the maximum recommended spoke tension of the rim manufacturer. But regardless, this spoke 3 is quite a bit loose, and this is actually the place where the rim is laterally out of deviation, out of trueness. It's way to the drive side. So this is under tensioned. If I tighten this spoke, it's going to bring the rim in that direction, which is the way I want to go. So I'm going to start by tightening this up a quarter turn and see what happens. So now I've tightened that spoke that was loose by just about half a turn. So tightening is clockwise when you're looking at the rim or looking through the rim. And it brought the tension back up quite a bit, well, by 5 kilograms of force. So it's at 110 kilograms of force. So it's still quite a bit lower than the others. And it's still at a trueness. So the wheel still has to go in the direction of the disc side or non-drive side. So I still need to tighten this spoke a bit more. So I'll try going another half a turn, or say a quarter to a half a turn. Okay, so again, that's another quarter turn to a half a turn. And I've brought the tension back up to 115 kilograms of force. So I'm getting close to where it needs to be. But the rim is still touching at that place. So I can still get away with tightening the spoke more to hopefully bring that rim into trueness and to get this spoke tension just a bit more closer to the tension of the adjacent spokes. Okay, so that spoke was really loose. I ended up tightening it more than a full turn, probably a full turn and a quarter, which is a lot. But as you can see, that actually brought it into trueness quite a bit. So if I look at my spreadsheet now and look at my spoke tensions, and right now I have it set for acceptable variation, spoke deviation variation of 10%, which is pretty tight. And it's how I built the wheel up a couple months ago. And everything is passing. So the spoke tensions are pretty good right now, but unfortunately the rim is better than it was before. I think you can hear that, but it's still rubbing and it's still laterally out of trueness. So what I'm going to go do is I'm going to find the spots on the rim that are wobbly, where I need to adjust the trueness, and working on both spokes on the drive side and non-drive side. I'm going to tighten them and hopefully get it into true without getting my spoke tensions too off. So that's what I'm going to do. So I think you can hear that. So it's touching the guide on my tool right here, right at this spoke here. So I can go ahead and just adjust this spoke, but what I like to do is, because it's never as precise as exactly this area of the rim that needs to be adjusted, I'm going to look at the spoke, this spoke, I'm going to measure the tension of this spoke and the two adjacent ones, and look at which of those three I can get away with tightening the tension. Obviously, if the tension's too high on some of these spokes, I prefer not to tighten them more. If one of them is a bit low, I'd like to work on that. And that was the case here. These adjacent spokes are pretty much at a pretty good tension, getting a bit high. This spoke I can afford to tighten. So this is the one I'll work on and tighten to try to get this wheel back in true. So I've done a bit of work on the disc side or non-drive side, and the wheel is starting to look pretty good actually. Still needs a bit of work, but I'm not going to continue to work on this side as I'm concerned about affecting the dish too much. So I'm going to flip it over and work on the other set of spokes. So in this case, again, this is part of the wheel that needs to be true, needs to go on this towards my right, which is towards the drive side. And both of these spokes are a bit low on tension. So since I can work in this general area, instead of just tightening one spoke, I'm going to actually tighten two spokes, but tighten each of them a bit less than I normally would. So I'm going to do a quarter turn on each. So just doing a check now, and I am getting pretty close to where I'm satisfied with the trueness of the wheel. If I spin it, there's just one area in particular that's still a fair amount off, which is right here. So I'm getting close. Just going to flip the wheel around and adjust some spokes on the other side. So now I've gone through and my spoke tensions are now looking pretty good. They're all within, basically within 120 to 130 kilograms of force, which is good, and they all pass. So the spoke deviation is less than 10%. So I should be done, but what I'll do is now I'll check the trueness with my gauges. All right, so I think I'm pretty much done. One thing I should mention is that if you are working with bladed spokes, depending on the particular type and depending on the rim, it can be really tough to true a wheel. So for sure, this wheel is much more finicky and difficult to true than a slightly less deep dish wheel with rounded spokes. I find the bladed spokes, once they get up to the tension they need to be, slight changes in the tension or slight tightening or loosening of the nipples really causes them to do drastic changes. So you have to really do finite changes as you get close to the tension you want. And now I'll check the dish on the wheel. Pretty darn close. Again, anything less than a millimeter is fine, and this is probably less than half a millimeter. So that's it. That's how I go about truing a wheel, and this should be good for a couple more seasons, or until the next crash. That's all I got for today, folks. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you're not subscribed to this channel, please subscribe, as it allows me to produce more content for all of you. See you next time. Happy rolling.